Hello and welcome to our series on cutover transitions. My name is Joey Vosters and I'm the Practice Director for Access Reporting and Technical Consultants here at Nordic, and today I'm joined by Becca Patterson. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, Becca?
Sure, I'm a consultant here at Nordic, and before this I worked at Epic for about 10 years, did some technical services and technical coordinator work there, and got to go through some of these fun cutovers with customers.
Okay, so you've been through the experience of kind of the midnight transitions and kind of really just kind of making sure that the new system is going to come up and be running for every user in the morning a few times.
Sure.
All right. So,
sure.
Why don't you tell us about a few of the things that, through your experience that you've seen that need to be done before the cutover starts?
So before your cutover starts, you probably want to go through some planning activities, including your Epic representatives. They've done that a lot. They've got great recommendations, so we want to start there. And they also have some great documentation that you can use to start. Several customers that I've talked to like to start with their upgrade checklist as a place to remember different things that have to happen when you're switching from one version to another, a lot of the similar activities that happen when you're doing cutover. So the first thing that you're going to do is make your plan. And you're going to make your plan for activities, like you said, before, during, and after. Some of the activities that you want to do before, things that can save you time during, are things like queuing up your data courier packages ahead of time, testing those in an environment that's like production to confirm that you know what the dependencies are that'll be coming through, and be sure that they'll go through clean the first time. That way when you're in the middle of the actual cutover, you know who's going to do it, you know what time they're going to do it, they send it through, and you know it's going to go through clean.
Yeah, and a lot of these cutovers, especially from the technical pieces, tend to happen either very late in the evening or very early in the morning, so it's definitely one of those things where you want to make sure you've got everything planned out and there's not going to be any surprises at 2 or 3 in the morning, right?
Exactly. Another thing that you can really plan ahead of time is your testing for your printers, your workstations, and your other hardware. So going through and having a really good list of an example of a server-side print and a client-side print that you can do on each device, that you could do from each workstation. That'll help make sure that you've got all your printers mapped correctly, make sure you've got the LWS records built for each printer. And then some other types of printing, like an RX script would be a good example of another type of printing. If you're doing bracelets in the hospital for the patients, if you're doing med labels, those types of printing, you want to go through all of those.
In terms of kind of additional printing things that, we've both put through a fair number of go-lives, making sure that the end users, what would you kind of suggest for having, kind of end user either support or documentation so that as much as we've maybe tested from a technical side all of those, when the morning rolls around and people really need to start printing off things, making sure that they have, what kind of documentation would you suggest for those types of people?
Sure. If you could have documentation prepared for your end users that included click-by-click instructions and also screenshots of what their workflow is going to look like, not only having that for the users right when it's time for go live, this is how you print this is how you do this flow, but also having them run through those steps ahead of time, that would be a great way to confirm that you've got all the steps documented correctly, that they can follow them and they're clear, and also that their security is set up correctly. Having the users get in the system ahead of time, not only to test the printing, but the other types of flows that they have to do high level, just making sure that their security is right, even if you've tested a template user that has the same template, supposedly. Sometimes you can see things that are a little different than you'd expect. So that's another area with the users that kind of segues, I guess, between printing and other areas that need to be tested ahead of time.
Yeah, and with a lot of these cutovers, if you're a brand new Epic customer and you're kind of rolling in, you don't necessarily have kind of pre-existing conditions for people that they might be used to, but if you're maybe rolling out an additional module or another piece of Epic functionality, you're going to already have existing users. So can you say anything about maybe how we want to make sure that the users who the morning before the conversion, they're going to have new functionality that turns on, but any steps that we could kind of take to make sure that those users are still going to be able to do everything that they used to be able to do if they need to the next morning?
Sure. So there's a couple things that you can do to ensure the integrity of the users that are in the system today when you're moving new functionality and new users in on top of already existing flows. One of the things that you can do is to save off some information about their setup today, including EMP and SCR configuration, as well as roles, templates assigned, what's in those templates, that type of thing. And you can do exports of that type of thing. Another way that I've seen customers do it when it's a bigger scale, more information they want saved or more information that they want to compare, is to actually have an additional copy of production other than the SUP or the shadow that they might temporarily keep for a couple of weeks after go live, and that gives you a place to go back and compare. what did you have before versus what do you have today. Sometimes something you might see is that you've changed something for a user or a group of users expecting it to affect only the new users, but you didn't realize that someone else might be relying on that template looking a certain way. You change something over here, it affects something over there, and you didn't expect that. Another thing that you sometimes see at Go Live is that not every user works every day, and sometimes those part-time users may not work the first 2 or 3 days of Go Live. So a user may come in on day 4, something's really different for that user, and it takes a little while to troubleshoot what did it used to look like versus what happened to the way that their login looks now. And if you've got that other environment to refer back to, that could save you a lot of time, since at that point SUP would already have been refreshed.
Yep, one of the most common questions that I think we've all heard at Go Lives and Cutovers is, it looks different than it did last week, and might not even be a user that was expecting a change, and having a reference environment or some sort of documentation to go back to that's exactly how they were set up is always very helpful when it comes to resolving other types of questions. So another topic that often comes up and people want to prepare for is make sure that they have downtime procedures and other BCA procedures in place. And those are definitely something you want to have before you go through your technical cutover. So can you tell us some work that maybe you've seen in the past, or some examples of good planning that people have done with BCA work?
Sure. I worked with a customer once who did BCA better than I had ever seen it since. It was just so impressive, and that's the example I'd like to go through. So I worked with a customer who, before cutover, had a very specific plan of how they were going to do BCA when it was time, when they needed it, right in the moment. And that plan included not only the workflows, but also the hardware in a very specific way. So what this customer did was they designated one workstation at every nurse's station throughout the hospital to be the BCA downtime PC. And when you walk into a unit, you could immediately identify it because they had put a red cardboard tube about this big on the top of the monitor using Velcro. Velcro on the top of the monitor and Velcro on the side of the tube. It's stuck right there. And inside it, they had all of the instructions, click by click, printed in color with screenshots of exactly what that unit clerk was going to do from the time they took the tube off to the time they were holding all the printouts in their hands. Everyone on the unit was holding the printouts. So this particular customer not only printed these instructions and identified the PCs visually, but also had each unit clerk run through from beginning to end like a fire drill a couple of times a year. And that's just their regular schedule. So when they had go lives, when the hospital was brought up for the first time, or any new functionality changed, they would have every unit clerk, even if it was his or her day off, come into the office, and they said, okay, the downtime is starting at this time. They came on the overhead speaker. It is now time for the drill of the downtime fire drill. Everybody log into the PCs. So the unit clerks all went over, took the tubes off, pulled the instructions out, went through click by click. And this was awesome, not only because it made sure every end user knew the flow, it made sure every end user knew which PC to use, but it also tested that the reports were going to the PCs, which reports you expected, so I didn't get some other unit's report on my PC, that the reports were regularly updating. Every once in a while something can happen there and you don't know the report's not going to that PC until you've got a downtime, so it helped with that. And also testing that the printer was hooked up and functioning, as well as the timing of how long it took to print out the actual reports. Sometimes customers can experience building this report they think is really wonderful and great, and the first time they actually use it during a downtime, they say, wow, this print group with all the flow she rows sure had a lot more pages than we thought. And 20 minutes later we still don't have the first patient finished printing yet. So this allowed them to do a timing test with actual data on how long it would take to get each report, and then making sure that after that point the user knows what to do. Sometimes people think that's where the flow ends, like, oh, it came out of the printer. But after that, I'm holding a stack of paper and got to pass it out to the nurses, then they need to know how to use that.
Yeah, because that is, when you're having a downtime, that's not necessarily the time where you want to be learning your downtime procedures again. And that customer example that you had sounds great. They almost took it to the level of almost like the fire extinguisher. They've got it almost like in a red box where, in case of downtime, break the seal and get ready for be able to keep your system up and keep everybody moving through the hospital. So that sounds like a great example of people who have really put in some time for their planning before they were going to do their cutovers, and that's really going to help them out even down the road after they're live for a long time.
Right, and I think that there's a big element to be said about the fact that they continue to do those tests over time. I think sometimes for Cutover, for our first hospital, something like that, we might do a lot of prep and a lot of testing, and we get really excited, and then afterwards we're like, oh, it's kind of plug and play. It's going now, it's fine.
Yep.
But having them go back regularly throughout the year and do it over and over means that those instructions continue to stay up to date as they change things, and new users that have joined the organization since they've gone live still get that same training and full experience of walking through it.
Yeah, make sure that everyone who's on every single shift can handle a downtime is a very important piece of. And if and unfortunately, if there's going to be downtime, it might be when the system is kind of new and fresh and you're just kind of running through your cutover. So that's especially you want to have it planned even before you're ready to make that cutover and bring your system live. So,
right.
So that sounds like we've covered a lot of different things that people could handle and talk about even before the really night of cutover. And then, so let's talk about a couple of things that we see that sometimes happen, during cutover or kind of immediately the next morning. So, what are some examples of things that you've seen where people really need to kind of, make sure that they've got the right things going on, even if it's that night of go live?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing I've seen is having a really specific plan that you're going to follow. Detail level out. Excel is a great tool, anything like that, where you can list this task is happening, time estimate of this person's doing it. Task is happening, time estimate, this person's doing it. A great cutover that I saw happened at an organization doing a big bang go live across a hospital enterprise wide, kind of as far as having every application there. And they had the biggest command room you can picture, a table for each application, just like you would have during the actual go live. But they did this for the cutover, and every team was there, including the Epic representatives and the customer representatives. And it was silence in the room, which is probably the most impressive part. And the project manager, whose job it was to own the cutover moment by moment, had the entire plan projected on a really large screen and went through line by line out loud with a microphone. Step 1, Joe Schmo, ADT table. Did you do this?
I'm kind of picturing that scene from the Apollo 13 movie where it's, they're all kind of in the command center and it's like, are we go or no go for launch? And they're just kind of running through the checklist, and it's very quick and making sure that everyone is kind of up and ready and making sure that they've done all of their responsible checks before we really kind of flip the switch. But that's kind of the scene that I'm envisioning, and it kind of sounds like you've had some people who have planned it out to that level.
If you can make your cutover like that scene, you have succeeded.
It's always it's a good model, NASA.
Yes.
They've got some pretty good checklists and some pretty good planning when it comes to making sure that everything's up and ready to go. So that, and like we said earlier, making sure that having everything ready to go, because these kind of happen in the middle of the night, and making sure that everyone is up and ready, making sure that everyone's just kind of fresh, and that you've got everyone's really just able to run their plan, and if surprises come up, being able to handle them as they're coming through. So any other pieces of making sure that we've gotten the right systems up and the right systems down, and any other kind of pieces. I know that some things that often come up are, there may be legacy systems that are still going to need to maybe keep running for a while. So can you talk through maybe what you've seen some people do for plans in terms of making sure that, even though we're rolling over to Epic, or, and what else do we maybe need to keep running?
Sure. So it's true that there's a lot of times when you're switching over that not every system will get switched at the same moment on the same day. So it would be really great ahead of time to make a list of all the systems that you're expecting to start coming in as far as new interfaces, and which systems might not come in immediately, and how you're going to handle those later, whether you're going to batch in information or how you're going to do it. So one example is if you have a lab that's going to be coming live as part of your hospital or clinic, and you have a system that is talking with Epic or with your legacy system before Epic for your orders and the results coming back on those orders. You might have some orders that are placed in the legacy system before the moment of cutover where you want the results to come back to the legacy system, and then as a package, that order and its corresponding result would get brought into Epic later through batch or another process. So having identified those ahead of time, which systems, which information for those systems will come now versus later, and knowing which things to flip the switch on now and which things to wait on. That's a great planning step.
And also having a plan that's going to involve the end users so that they know where the data is going to be. Because there's nothing, you want to make sure that your physicians, when the first things come around in the morning, they might be looking for those lab results that came, were ordered the night before. You want to make sure that they're not, lost or that they know where they're going to look for those information. So making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page when it comes to
Right.
where those things are going to be is also very important.